Hi, Clifford Goldstein here. Welcome you to Contending for the Faith. This is part of a series called Faith and Science, where we look at questions of, well, faith and science. And these are important topics to look at, especially together, because even in the 21st century, faith remains an important aspect, an important part of people's lives. Though there have been through the ages all sorts of prognostications about how faith was going to disappear from the earth and all that, this is hardly the case. Human beings are at the core not just physical beings, but spiritual beings as well. We all have spiritual natures, even if everyone doesn't recognize it as spiritual. But there's something in us that tends to grasp and reach out for more than just what we are or what we could see. There's an innate sense in us of a reality that transcends the here and now. Well, anyway, that's a very broad definition of the concept of spirituality. And in many cases, though, this need is expressed by what is commonly known as faith or religion. And these have certainly not, especially in some parts of the world, died out as been predicted. Okay, it still remains a very important force in our lives. I believe that as long as human beings exist on earth, we will be spiritual beings. In fact, if I read my Bible correctly, my understanding is that spirituality is going to exist and be a major factor even to the final events of Earth's history. But alas, that's a whole other matter entirely. At the same time, though, as relevant as faith is, science has been and is still very relevant and flourishing. It's a powerful force in our life, and rightly so. I think many, many human beings alive today, one degree or another, have had their lives impacted by science. Most likely anyone here, too, listening to my words right now, or looking at my getting torqued out face, or enjoying many of the fruits and benefits of science. Please, our lives are changing at a rapid pace due, I think, more to science than anything else in the world. In fact, if you stop to think about it, how science has and is impacting your life, I would say that that technology has no doubt really impacted our lives in very, very powerful ways. And though we can debate whether it's been positive or negative, I think, and that's not where I want to go, though I think for most part it's been positive. That's my point. My point is that religion, like faith, science, like faith, remains a very powerful force in human existence. And that's why I've been doing this series to begin with, because we have two potent forces in the world today, faith and science, and sometimes they work in powerful harmony with each other. Okay, since the advent of what we call science, which was actually the term scientist itself was coined by a man named William Ewell in 1834, there has been very little discord between the two, despite the idea that all through the centuries, science and faith have been clashing. That is kind of a myth. In fact, I don't want to bog down into this now, but some have argued that it was only in the context of faith, only in the context of the belief in a divine creator, that science could have arisen in the first place. Okay, and that's because there is this foundational idea in science that there is a rational world out there to discover. And I use that term very broadly because in the era of quantum physics, the word rational takes on whole new meanings. It's not the way we traditionally understood it. Anyway, it was thought that at the heart of all science lies the idea that the universe is orderly, Because if it weren't, if it were all chaos and confusion, then how could we really do science? The earliest scientists, sometimes called natural philosophers, worked from the idea that they were discovering the handiwork of God. One 20th century Welsh scientist, John Houghton, wrote, quote, "Our science is God's science. He holds the responsibility for the whole scientific story. This remarkable order, consistency, reliability, and fascinating complexity found in the scientific description of the universe are reflections of the order, consistency, reliability, and complexity of God's activity." But the question is, why should the world be orderly or rational enough to be subject to our scrutiny to begin with? The mere idea of this has that this is how it is has made science possible. And for many people, the only reason that it is orderly or can be orderly is because God had created it. No question, the idea that from the start, closed-minded religionists have been hampering the pursuit of truth through science is really, it's a modern myth. And the truth is really much, much more complicated than that. For many people, myself included, science has made, if anything, has made us marvel at the power of the Creator God. David wrote, "The heavens declare the glory of God." David wrote this. This was a man that didn't have a clue about the size and the grandeur and the majesty of the cosmos. He never looked through a telescope. He never saw an island galaxy. Science has opened up so much grandeur, so much complexity, so much wonder. To me, it all shouts with undeniable power about the reality of God. And I guess it did to Paul, too, who wrote the following. Listen to this. This is Paul. Don't blame me. "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse." Woo! No question. Science and faith have worked very well together, but not always. And this is what I wanted to look in today as one area where they haven't, at least not in recent times. And this has to do in the area of origins, the origins of the universe and the origins of humanity, because they are, of course, linked. There's been a great divide between science and faith, particularly biblical faith. And that's what I want to look at in this program. You know, for most of human history, people could look around at the created world and see evidence of a creator or creators of some type. I mean, it's just, our world itself seems to scream out design. We could see it in the flowers. We could see it in the trees. We could see it in the animals. We could see it in the cell. We see it in human beings, in fish, in cats, and butterflies, in the atom, in the carbon molecules. Everywhere we can see it. You know, by analogy, my iPhone sure looks designed, doesn't it? Well, in the same way, my dog, my big old German Shepherd, she looks designed too. In fact, I think there's a lot more design and more intricacy in my dog than in my iPhone. Thus, I look at my dog and I see design. And design, almost by the very term itself, design, means that somewhere out there was a designer. There's a name for this argument. It's called the teleological argument, from the Greek word telos, which means purpose or end purpose. Things are designed for a reason. okay, that design is built in, so whatever it is, an octopus eye, an eagle's wing, a cell wall, a human nose, all are designed because they have a goal, a purpose, a teleos. The octopus eye is there for the octopus to see. The eagle's wings is there so the eagle can fly. A cell wall, well, for all the purposes that a cell wall has, such as holding the cell together. And a human nose is there so that humans can smell. All these are a teleos. They are a purpose, okay? That's what they were designed for. Well, that's been one argument for God. And there's another argument, and it goes back a long way as well. It's been called the cosmological argument. And the essence of the argument is this, is that nothing that was created had created itself. Again, nothing that was created itself. Notice, I said that nothing created, as opposed to something uncreated, created itself. There's a big difference here, and one we should not miss. Anything that once didn't exist, but then came into existence, had to come into existence from something before it, something that preceded it and also created it. That's just simple, down-to-earth logic, common sense. Something that does not exist cannot create itself, because to create itself, it would have to already exist. And if it already existed, then it didn't create itself. Instead, something else had to create it. And whatever created it, that was created by something else. Then something else created it before, and you go on and on and on. And you keep going back until you get to something that always existed, something that always was. And what else, who else could that be but the God depicted in the Bible? And without him, nothing made, nothing created. None of those things that were made and created were created without him. So you see, there's a radical difference, a radical distinction between what always existed, what always was, and what came into existence. And God, the Creator, always was. And he's radically different from the creation, that which once didn't exist but now does. Anyway, this had always been a powerful argument for the Creator, for the one who created all things that once didn't exist but now do. Now, what's fascinating is that science in recent years has taken paths that it claims pretty much refutes both these arguments. And that's what I want to look at, the claims of science that it can refute these arguments. If that were true, then two of the oldest and I think most powerful arguments in favor of God's existence are then refuted by science. And for many people, as I've said before in other shows, if science says something, if science refutes something about their faith, what is that person but to accept what science says? That's at least the argument that many believe. And I want to look at that idea as well, because if you've been following this series, you'll know just how false and misleading that whole concept really, really is. Anyway, what I want to start out with is the teleological argument, the argument from design. Now, you might think it would be more logical to start out with the cosmological argument and then come to that, but I think you'll see why I want to take the paths that I am. Now, the argument from design. As I said, for most of human history, people looked around the world and saw design, they saw beauty, they saw what looked like teleos, a teleos, and so they just didn't believe it was all thrown together by chance. They thought this was evidence of God. Well, then along comes old Charlie Darwin and the theory of evolution, and soon for many people, the whole idea of design, the whole idea of a teleos is being cast aside. Things only look like they're designed. They merely give the appearance that they are designed, but they aren't. Instead, we're taught through the long process of natural selection and random mutation, all that life that exists today came into existence. It's all we were assured products of these two cold and unconscious purposeless forces, random mutation and natural selection. I mean, this is where science has taken us, at least according to how many people understand science. The whole idea of design, or I should say conscious design, was being thrown out, despite the rather obvious fact that every living thing, from a single-cell critter to a human being, sure looked fantastically complex. However, also in the past 30-some years, a new phenomena has risen. They're called anthropic coincidences. They're from the Greek word anthropos. But notice the other word, coincidences. That's kind of a loaded word, but that's a whole other issue. I don't want to get into it. But anyway, the point is that science is finding these incredible fine-tuning in nature. There's all this fine-tuning. It's often been described like this. Imagine a machine with 30 dials on it. Only these dials are refined down to the tiny, the billionth. You could turn a knob to the billionth. Now, these dials represent the crucial fundamental constants that are needed for nature. And they're all there in a certain way. If one of these dials were tweaked even the slightest bit, life we know couldn't exist. Hence, they get the word anthropic for man. Okay, and it's the whole idea that the whole universe is created for man or mankind. Anyway, the problem with the anthropic coincidence, or the problem that these things bring up, is that these numbers just seem too small, too fantastic to have happened by chance alone. I mean, these scientists see these mind-blowing ratio, and suddenly the idea of this occurring by chance becomes mathematically impossible. It just doesn't seem possible how these ratios of these dials for these fundamental constants, the slightest tweaking, and human life couldn't exist. Okay, it becomes mathematically impossible. Well, it seems that science has come to the rescue again in a way that can explain these amazing anthropic coincidences without a creator. Okay, that's a concept that arose, and it's called the multiverse. This is opposed to the universe. Yes, one universe. The multiverse means that there are many universes. Yes, we are now being told that our universe, this vast cosmos that we can barely wrap our minds around, this is just one of possibly an infinite number of universes out there. Now, I'm not even going to try to fake understanding, saying that I understand the theoretical physics behind it. But there's this idea now, presently popular, which talks about how our universe has been expanding when it was first created. They call it inflation, and supposedly there's some theoretical evidence for it. And the idea is that as the universe expanded, it just got so big that it started to spawn other bubble universes, which inflated into more universes, and on and on and on. This kind of internal inflation, creating, we're told, an infinite number of universes. This is right now the theory du jour. What it'll be like, in 10 years, who knows? The fact is that we have not seen any physical evidence of even one more universe. We barely know what's in ours. It's speculation at the highest level. But now, whether this inflationary model is correct, I don't know. But really, and whether or not it leads to other universes, I don't know. I tend to be very skeptical. But whether it does or not, it's now being touted as a way out of the teleological argument. I mean, if you have an infinite number of universes out there, then it's not unlikely that one of them could end up like ours, as finely tuned as it is for human beings. I mean, look at it like this. If someone shuffles a deck of cards one time, what are the odds that they're going to pull out 4 aces in a row if they do it one time? Well, I don't know. It's pretty slim. But however, if they shuffle the cards billions and billions of times, then sooner or later someone's bound to pick 4 aces. It's not impossible. In fact, it's probably likely to happen. Well, that's the argument with the multiverse. Okay. Now, this theory wasn't, as far as I know, designed specifically to respond to the question of wasn't devised specifically to respond to the question of design, but it's sure been used by some to try to answer it. Sure, the bottom line is it might be hard to understand how one universe like ours could turn out as fine-tuned as it did to make human life here. But on the other hand, if you have billions of universes out there like ours, then surely it's likely that something like ours would turn up. Anyway, that's what's happening here in science. Here is science being used to try and justify really what is a metaphysical position, a philosophical assumption that is not scientific. I have said before that we need to understand that not everything coming under the name of science really is science. In fact, I would argue that it can never only be science. There are philosophical presuppositions always involved. Anyway, the bottom line is, even if one accepts this multiverse, even if one accepts that there are really millions and billions and maybe an infinite number of universes out there, then we still got the question, how did the multiverse get started? I mean, if one universe needs an explanation, what about an infinite number of them? How did the process start that allowed for these infinite number of universes to be created to begin with? Well, they claim they have an answer for that as well. And that answer is that, listen to this, that nothing created the universe. Or, if you will, nothing created the multiverse. I'm not kidding you. There's a popular theory now spouted by all sorts of scientific luminaries. That popular theory spouted by them is that our universe, and hence all the universes, arose out of nothing at all. And really, in many ways, that's the most logical argument these people have, if you're going to reject the idea of a creator God. American physicist Lawrence Krauss wrote a book called A Universe from Nothing. I read it, and he goes to great lengths to argue that our universe, or even the multiverses, all arose out of nothing. In his best-selling book, A Short History of Nearly Everything, author Bill Bryce wrote the following: "It seems impossible that you could get something from nothing, but the fact that once there was nothing, but now there is a universe is evident proof that you can." Evident proof, huh? What a powerful and self-evident truth that is. Surprised it took humans this long to come up with it. Even the man considered by many the greatest scientist alive, Stephen Hawking, has argued the same thing. Hawking wrote, "Because there is such a thing as the law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist." Now, as silly as all this is, there's a logical reason for this argument, and it has nothing to do with science. Remember when we talked about the cosmological argument? Nothing created itself. Anything that once didn't exist but came into existence had to come from something before it, and then something before it, and on and on and on. And then you get back to finally something that always existed, And who or what else could that be but the God of the Bible? He alone doesn't need an explanation for how he got there. And that's because he always existed. Now, the only other option, the only other source of our origins that doesn't need an explanation would be the idea that if nothing created the universe, right? If nothing created the universe, if nothing is the source of all existence, then there's no deeper explanation. After all, it is nothing. So there is no need to assume anything before it that could explain where it came from. Nothing is nothing. Thus, it doesn't need anything prior to explain it. Thus, the idea of nothing as an alternative to an eternal existing God really is the only logical and rational alternative. And that's because only two things in the cosmological argument don't need anything to explain where they came from. The first, only two things don't need anything to explain them. The first thing is an eternal existing God. Nothing explains it because God was always there. He always existed. So the first thing that doesn't need an explanation to explain him is an eternal existing God. The second thing is nothing. Nothing does not need an explanation either. So, which do you think is more logical? Nothing created the universe, or a self-existing God created the universe? Now, the reason I bring these 2 points up, the multiverse and nothing, is really to show this idea of science as purely rational and objective is a myth. And in these 2 cases, we could see where science, exceedingly speculative science, is at time bordering on what I would deem science fiction. We're seeing it being used to promote what's definitely a non-scientific agenda. In this case, it's the whole idea to refute God's existence. Again, I don't think these were conjured up for this purpose, or maybe they were, but they're being used to promote that agenda. So look at the extremes here that science is using to get us away from God. Life arose from nothing or from an infinite number of universes. Wouldn't a supernatural creator be a logical explanation as opposed to these other scientific options?